I'm Connor Old, and welcome to Connor the Contrarian, a weekly podcast where I talk about movies that either the critics or the audiences didn't like that I think are actually great movies. And today, I'm going to be talking about the forgotten Farrelly Brothers comedy that was overshadowed by Dumb and Dumber and There's Something About Mary and is arguably just as funny. I'm talking about Kingpin. Now, before we jump into the movie, I always like to talk about the cultural landscape of the film at the time of release. This helps us understand the mind frame of society, which greatly influences those initial reviews. And now at the top of the show, I mentioned that this was sandwiched between two comedy giants of the 90s, Dumb and Dumber and There's Something About Mary, which were both directed by the Farrelly Brothers. But it's more important to recognize the success of Dumb and Dumber because this is the film that directly followed it. Dumb and Dumber was a huge hit, released in 1994, and really launched Jim Carrey into stardom because he had a great year that year with Ace Ventura and The Mask. So, they had no problem getting Kingpin made because Dumb and Dumber was such a huge success. And then, when it came out, it bombed at the box office, leaving the Farrelly Brothers' career in stake. The reviews were overall poor, with a few exceptions, most notably being Siskel and Ebert, but most people thought it was dumb and a disappointment from Dumb and Dumber. They were now sort of on the ropes when making their next movie because it sort of seemed like they were one-hit wonders. But as soon as it hit home video, it actually started to do really well, launching into a sort of a cult status. And I can say I'm a bit of that status. I think this may be the Farrelly Brothers' best movie, and that's saying a lot since it can easily be forgotten as the movie they just made in between Dumb and Dumber and There's Something About Mary. But it's much more than that. It has the emotional weight of Color of Money, the heart of Dumb and Dumber, and one of Bill Murray and Woody Harrelson's best performances of all time. So, let's jump into the movie. We open to a man pumping gas as his son runs up to him and asks him if he wants to play a quick game before supper. He says sure, and as they go out back, they have a land bowling set up in their backyard. The dad tells his boy that if he applies everything he learns from bowling to his life, he'll be a good man. We then cut to 1974 and see the boy grown up to be a young man. His name is Roy Munson and is played by Woody Harrelson. He's got that 70s swagger as everyone gathers around him to watch him bowl. He's this big thing from the small town, and he's about to go off and travel and become a bowler going from city to city and trying to find those state championships. His whole town is proud of him, but the only opinion that matters to him is his father's. They clearly have a close relationship, and before he leaves, his father gives him a pocket watch for him to use when he's in a pinch, just in case. Now, we see him at the state bowling championships, and he's playing against Ernie McCracken, played by Bill Murray. He's trying to throw off his game by sort of talking, but nothing is going to stop this kid from success, as he bowls a strike and wins the tournament. Then, as he's driving home from the tournament, his engine craps out. And when he gets to check out, we see that someone had actually put sugar in his engine, and getting it fixed will cost him $2,000. Ernie, or Big Ern, as he wants to be called, just happened to be there with a bag of sugar in his backseat, and offers him to take him to dinner. So Roy can sort of learn the trades from a veteran bowler like Ernie, despite him just losing to Roy. We see how dumb Roy actually is, because he doesn't know what the word supplemental means, and all he really does is just bowl. And here we see sort of the charm of Ernie, that Bill Murray really allows Ernie to lure Roy in, and Bill Murray does a great job really with his character. Ernie convinces Roy that if he wants to make some cash in the bowling world, they need to do something a little bit on the side. He takes him to a bowling alley, and they pretend that they're dictionary salesmen, so they can hustle the bowlers there out of their money. They purposefully lose $350 to a priest with only a couple of vices. Then, before they leave, they go double or nothing. That Roy can't hit a 2-1 spare. And of course, they hustle them and it works. He does it and they win $700. But it doesn't take long for the guys to come out with baseball bats and start smashing the windows out of their car after they realize what actually just happened to them. Then Ernie gets Roy to get out of the car, and Ernie drives away, leaving him with these guys. And they decide to teach Roy a little lesson and bring him inside, and they put his hand in a ball receiving machine, and then he screams in pain. And we cut to 17 years later in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We see Roy in a crappy apartment complex. He's got no hair on the top of his head, just on the sides, and has a hook for a hand, which he immediately covers up with a rubber fake hand. When he wakes up, he immediately goes for the bottle and is behind on rent. This is the type of guy he's sort of spiraled into. There's a funny line that explains his emotional state, actually, by the people that live in the same complex as him. He asks one of them, "How's life?" And the guy responds, "Taking too long." Roy works as a bowling salesman as he tries to sell bowling accessories to the bowling alleys, and he's not really successful at it because people don't really want his stuff. But while he's at one, he hears a strike and immediately knows the problem with this guy's game. This guy is Ishmael Borg, played by Randy Quaid. Roy thinks he has potential and, sort of impressed when he says he can bowl 260, 270 on average. He wants to help him get better, but Ishmael isn't interested because he's Amish, and he's not even supposed to be bowling because it's against his way of life. Then, on Roy's way home, we see a man trying to rob his landlord. He jumps in, saves the day, and in a state of bliss, the landlord thanks Roy and tells him to give her the rent whenever he gets the chance. Then we see him enter his apartment, and as he gives the guy who just tried to quote-unquote rob his landlord $25. Oh, that's all good. Sort of a smart way to get out of your rent, until the landlord walks to the apartment to see him and the robber being buddy-buddy. She freaks out and is about to call the cops, but Roy will do anything for that not to happen. And then we cut and we hear The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel as the landlord is smoking in her bed and Roy is throwing up in the toilet. I mean, Roy has really hit rock bottom at this place. He has to think of something to get money, so he dresses up as an Amish man so he can get to Ishmael. But once again, Ish rejects him. But Roy isn't giving up yet, as he tries to work on the farm, and then in a sequence of him doing stuff, proves to be the worst Amish ever by milking the bulls and, leaving the sort of giant, that while they're building a house, leaves in the middle of it. But you know what they say in the Bible about not forgiving, right? It's against it. So we learn that the farm won't last very long because the bank will actually foreclose on it, and that the Amish are also in some money trouble. And if they don't come up with $500,000, the bank will foreclose the farm. With no other options, Ishmael decides to go with Roy to try this bowling thing out and hope to get good enough to make it to the bowling championships in Reno, Nevada that has a $1 million prize for the winner. And we start the beginning of this long road trip, starting with Roy introducing Ish to all the things he hasn't had, like when he was Amish, like how Roy says to Ishmael, he should smoke cigarettes because they aren't bad for you, because if you're dead, then you can't smoke. So why would the American Tobacco Research Foundation lie? The joke plays well today because all of our knowledge about smoking, and then they go to their first sort of practice match, and Ishmael does terrible and only bowls a 180. That's, actually surprisingly good for him, because when he was telling Roy his average before, he was talking about 15 frames, not 10 frames, because the Amish always do 1.5 times harder than everyone else. So this entire time, he thought Ishmael was this great bowler because of his score, but that was with more frames. Roy is screwed, but he's got no one else to train him, so he's got to train him. There's a montage of him training Ish that includes the best really camera work in the movie. There's this great 360 rotation shot that stays in focus the entire time as it rotates around them before and after they bowl. And the bowling shots are really inventive. They use different types, so it always feels fresh. Now we have more humor of Ish learning things where it seems as if he's on the toilet, sort of in a medium, asking questions to Roy, reading his newspaper, and when the scene ends, it cuts to a wide of him beside like two other people who are on the urinal, and he's actually sitting on the urinal, as just Roy sort of shakes his head. There are also some funny gags with the rubber hand that are used well, and comedies rarely use props nowadays like that, but they always refer back to it, and he doesn't even have a prosthetic hand, but a rubber one, so it allows for some funny sight gags when he's using his fingers like they were a real hand. But Roy doesn't have enough money to get to Reno, Nevada, and needs to pull out the old dictionary hustle. This time, it works terribly because of Ishmael's innocence, selling the fact that he's such a great salesman. Hey, you don't need to read them to sell them. It fails miserably, but luckily for them, the bartender tells them of the game that's straight up, just for money. So they drive to this huge mansion where they meet Stanley Osmanski, played by Rob Moran, who has eyeliner under his eyes, and it's kind of weird and kind of mysterious. But he's got his own private bowling alley, and it's $1,000 a game. Then we cut to see Roy. He has one $100 bill and a bunch of Monopoly money. So if Ish doesn't win, they're screwed. Now we have to see if Roy's trading has done Ish any good. he has to bowl three strikes in a row and does it. They win the money, but as Roy is getting the money, Osmansky sees that he has monopoly money and was betting with money he didn't have. And so when they're about to beat them up, Osmansky's girlfriend Claudia, played by Vanessa Angel, turns off the lights and helps Roy and Ish escape. They make their way to a diner where Roy's grateful and all, but doesn't need her help. But Claudia can't go back because it was an abusive relationship and really needs this. And she knows that they don't have enough money to get to Reno, and she does. So Roy sort of reluctantly becomes business partners with her. And while they're talking, there are some guys who confronted Ishmael for dancing with one of the guy's girlfriend. And there's a great moment, maybe my favorite moment of the movie, where Roy sees this, walks up to them, sort of checks the guy out, and sees that they're double the size of Roy. So Roy does what any sensible friend would do. He sucker punches Ish right square in the face, getting out of fighting them. They get out of the situation due to the quick thinking of Roy, despite him even having a beer with the guys afterwards. Now, with the help of Claudia, they start hustling for money using Claudia's looks and Ish's skills. So Claudia would sort of distract them in certain cases, but in other times they would use sheep as sort of a farmer's joke there. But eventually they get more than enough to get to Reno, and as soon as this happens, while staying overnight, Roy tries to sneak Ish out with Claudia to only discover she is sleeping in the car, therefore catching him in the act of trying to leave her, because now that they got the money, Roy just wants to leave. He doesn't want a business partner. He's sort of greedy. She's pissed and proceeds to kick the crap out of Roy. That has some of the film's funniest physically humorous moments. But when they get back to the car, they realize Ishmael is left. They get in the car and start looking for him, and when they are looking for them, Roy actually stumbles on his old town. We learn that he was seen as a disappointment and a total Munson, which is now a phrase used for when someone has everything in the world and they just, throw it all away. He didn't even, we learn they didn't even come to his own dad's funeral, which is heartbreaking because we know the beginning of the film that shows all the sort of love he had for his dad. Roy has been sort of living a life of sleaze and dirtiness that has shaped the last 17 years of his life. And this is where the film really shifts its goals. The bowling tournament becomes less important, and more of these backstories about Roy and how he messed up his life so bad is really in a shape that cannot be repaired. This is where the film starts to sort of switch and focus on that it wasn't just the hand that screwed his life up, but how he chose to respond to it, never taking any blame and resorting to solve his problems with the bottle. Here, by saying out loud, he kind of realizes how stupid he's been with his life, and reliving his glory years have brought him out of it. And I understand, they bring out the idea of, we see this with high school football players in Texas, where it's such a big thing, and there's so much pressure on these young guys that if they don't become to the NFL, they don't go be a great college football player, their life is sort of gone because they were so focused on that when it doesn't pan out, it's heartbreaking to them. So he takes his dad's pocket watch and throws it on the ground, using the visual metaphor of literally leaving the past behind, because the clock hadn't worked since he left the town 17 years ago. Then, as they stop at a strip club, they see Ish performing on stage and get him out of there. We really keep the road trip aspect of this movie, as all of the montages are done for now this sort of road trip montage. They did it well in Dumb and Dumber, and they do it well here. Like when Ishmael puts shaving cream on Roy's nose, and then the next scene we see Roy with a Band-Aid on his nose because he obviously hit it with his hook, but you don't see that. It's a cute montage that really transitions them into arriving at Reno. And who's there but Big Ern? And the character of Big Ern is really, personally, one of Bill Murray's best, and everyone forgets he's in the movie. He improvised actually almost every line, and just, I think, really knew the guy. He's even more sleazy than Roy, and is sort of the ultimate womanizer that has just so many funny lines. He's just the biggest jerk, and when he goes too far, Ish tries to punch him, he misses, and hits his hand on a wall. As Roy and Ish get his hand checked out, Claudia goes to the room where they run to her old boyfriend Osmansky, the guy they sort of left at that private bowling alley. Out of fear for the guy's safety, she stays with them and gives them the money they made on the way. Then we find out another heartbreaking news. Ish has broken his hand and can't bowl. Everything is falling apart for Roy. Once again, a Munson. There's only one option now. Roy needs to bowl. And one last condition that Roy hasn't had, because he hasn't paid his dues and now has no money, leaving him to give up his state championship ring for collateral. The tournament starts, and he still got it, despite the rubber hand. We see that he hasn't bowled in a long time, and maybe he hasn't even tried to bowl with the rubber hand. But what is it? It's a man who is discovering himself and what makes him happy again. His job was so close to bowling that it almost hurt him more than anything because he was so close to it. He starts to get in his groove, and he becomes a major contender in the tournament until there are only two bowlers left, him and Ernie. Ernie is loved by everyone, which grinds our gears because we know he's such a jerk. He even has a charity that helps out single moms in an absurd infomercial we see on TV. But the match between the two guys gets heated, and the more heated it gets, the worse the hair of the two guys get. Ernie is wearing a hairpiece, and obviously Roy can't afford that. That's why Roy is just going sort of with the bald thing, and why he wears the hat. Ernie obviously has that hairpiece, but once it starts moving out of place, it's all over the place. It's even more ridiculous than Roy's. And now Roy got a spare, putting Ernie on the ropes, as Ernie needs to get 3 strikes in a row to win the game. Then, as Roy looks behind him, Ishmael has left, as his Amish brother has come to take him away. Then, one of the low points of the movie, Ernie hits 1, 2, 3 strikes in a row and wins the championship, and Roy goes away empty-handed. And there's a great line that Ernie says, that was just totally improvised, like, I can get away with anything I can, just to see this jerk do all this, incredibly mean stuff, but still win in the end. But then, as Roy goes back to his apartment, Claudia shows up with double their money there to sort of say sorry. He says he doesn't need it because he actually got a $500,000 check from Trojan for a sponsorship. And they decide the obvious thing to do is to go to Ishmael, as they tell him that Roy was saved by Ish, and that their journeys, Ish really taught him all this stuff to sort of cover up for Ish being, totally crazy and doing all these vices and getting a tattoo. And eventually they learn that because of Roy, they're able to keep the farm. And we end the movie as Ishmael introduces his community to rock and roll as the credits roll. Ultimately, I think this movie is a great comedy, but it's really a movie about a man who is learning to rediscover his passion and get his confidence back. It has genuine heart and absurd and crude but funny moments. It's underrated, underseen, and under-talked about comedy classic. So if you like movies like Dumb and Dumber and There's Something About Mary, check this one out because I would argue it's just as good. It has the comedy, it has a pretty good sort of romantic thing, and really overall just a solid heart. Because Kingpin is a great movie. I'm Connor Old. Make sure you rate and review the podcast on iTunes. It really helps. I also have a YouTube channel. Just search Connor Old and you'll find other film-related content, including a series that I'm doing right now called Old on Old, where I look at a classic movie I've never seen before and talk about why it's a classic. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and until next time, stay tuned.